Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to this short session on job crafting. Tim Baker's my name, and I'll be spending 30 minutes with you, just giving you a bit of an overview about what job crafting is all about and perhaps how you might apply it as well, how you might use it in your own organization if you haven't already. Now, job crafting sounds a little bit fancy, but if you think about it, we're job crafting all the time. So when you come into a job, for the very first time, you're given a job description, of course. And what happens is you sit down and you look at the job description and you dutifully follow it as you go through the job. But what happens as you move through that job is that you have a tendency subconsciously to do the things that you enjoy doing and perhaps do less of the things that you don't enjoy doing. So what it means in practice that if you're in the same job for, say, 2 years, by the time you come out of that job, the job actually is different to what it was 2 years earlier by virtue of the energies that you put into that job, how you actually expend that time. So it's an interesting concept to look at as such. All right, so just bear with me for a moment, and I just need to organize things. Okay, sorry about that. So let me just put the video back on. So let's have a look at the topic itself. So first of all, many of you would know who I am. I'm an author, Tim Baker. I have written 11 books, and one of those books, of course, is Breaking the Proactive Paradox, which I'm going to talk about today. I also present. I'm a keynote speaker at various conferences. I also executive coach, and in my spare time, I still play rugby in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brisbane, which is probably a little bit sad. We play every 2 weeks because, quite frankly, it takes about 2 weeks to recover at my age. So anyway, moving on. So one of the objections that people can have to this concept of job crafting, it's not so much an objection, but it's certainly a valid question. How can job crafting increase performance? Because if you've got a job specification and you've got a job description, and because it's changed, deliberately this time changed, how can you actually increase performance? Well, the argument is that if people, and there's been some research to show this, that if people are job crafting, they're likely to be more engaged in their work, they're likely to be more productive, they're likely to have greater energy. There's a whole bunch of possibilities. And the reason for that is that they're shaping the job to suit their own particular needs on the one hand, but also their strengths on the other. Now, this is not a license, of course, to go off and just do whatever you want in the workplace. That's not exactly what job crafting is about. This is something that has to be negotiated between the manager and the employee. So they'll both sit down and work that out. So I'm going to look at a couple of things today. I want to look at the proactive paradox to start with, because the proactive paradox is central to reasons why people aren't showing enough initiative in the workplace. And quite honestly, job crafting is showing initiative. So job crafting is an employee-driven exercise. It's not a top-down, it's a bottom-up type approach. Obviously, the manager has to agree with the various changes that the employee wants to make in their job, but it has to be actually initiated from the individual themselves. Of course, we'll talk about job crafting, and I've got a special offer for you at the end of the presentation. So I guess the first question to ask is, we hear the word paradox all the time, and it's bandied around a lot. And I often like to use the chicken and the egg scenario. So what comes first? Is it the chicken or is it the egg? And that's always an interesting question. And I guess the same can be true of initiative in the workplace. What comes first? Is it the manager encouraging the employee to show initiative? Is that the starting point? Or is it the actual employee who decides to show initiative and then the manager endorses it? Where does it come from? Does it start with the manager or does it start with the employee? So that's why I call it a paradox. And if I could just explain how the paradox works, it's a simple diagram here. So basically, in most situations, what actually happens is the leader wants his or her team members to show initiative in the right place, in the right way. So that's normally how most leaders think. I'm sure you're the same. But on the other hand, the employee also wants to show initiative and have some autonomy in their work. Most employees want to be not micromanaged. They want to be able to make their own decisions about how they do things. So at the beginning of this whole process, everybody, or most people at least, are on the same page. So what happens? Well, what happens is this. The manager perhaps has gone to a workshop, comes back, has a team meeting, maybe if it's a remote team, doing it via Zoom, or if it's in a room, we'll do it with the people in the room. And basically the manager will say to his or her team, I'd like you to show more initiative. I'm giving you a license to do that. And the team members that are sitting in the room are thinking to themselves, of course, they don't say this, but they're thinking, I don't believe my manager. I don't think that he or she is fair dinkum about that. So they sit on their hands and do nothing. So there's a little bit of a sort of like a Mexican standoff. And then the manager over the next couple of weeks notices that very little initiative is taken. And because there's very little initiative taken, the manager thinks to themselves, I've got to fill this vacuum because obviously nobody's jumping in and showing initiative. So what happens is the manager jumps in and does a lot of the work that he was hoping that the team members would do. Now, the team members, of course, observe the manager jumping into the arena and doing these sorts of things. And the team members think to themselves, aha, I knew my manager didn't really want us to show initiative. There he is, or there she is. They're micromanaging again. And this is what I call the proactive paradox. So it's like a dog chasing its tail. It never catches it, but it's always entertained, or at least for a period of time, it's entertained. So what happens, of course, at the end of this is that the manager's frustrated with the team members because they're not showing initiative, and the team members are frustrated with the manager because they think that the manager's micromanaging. But all the while, of course, they both wanted the same thing. The employee wanted to show initiative and the manager wanted the employee to show initiative. So that's the paradox. And basically there are three key processes, or three key stages. There's agreement initially, and that is the agreement that the manager wants the employee to show initiative and the employee wants to show initiative, so they're both on the same page. And then there's skepticism because the manager makes an announcement and the team members don't believe the manager, so they sit on their hands. And then, of course, the manager jumps in because there's a vacuum that needs to be filled, and the employee is then confirmed in their skepticism that the manager wants us to show initiative. So that's how it works. And of course, you can read more about that in my book, Breaking the Proactive Paradox. All right, so let's talk about job crafting. I think the very first thing I should do is give you an example of job crafting. So I'm going to give you probably about 2 or 3 examples throughout our short time together, so you get a sense of what it actually means. Here's an example. Paul works in IT and customer support. He spends most of his time on helping on the helpline, but has a passion for testing and improving new software. So that's what he's really interested in. Through discussion with his manager, Paul joined a group that tested new application before they were launched in the company. This took about 3 hours every month. while Paul's role didn't substantially change through job crafting, he was delighted that his skill and passion for analysis of new applications was being recognised. So there's a very simple example where a person who has a passion in a particular area is given a license to basically do some work in that area, and they become energized through that process. That's a very simple definition, or a very simple example. I've got two more examples I'll share with you shortly. So basically what it means is that if somebody wants to job craft, they've essentially got three options, right? They can, what we call task craft, they can cognitive craft, or relational craft. Now, task craft is the most obvious of the three forms of crafting, and that is where the actual individual employee either modifies the work that they're doing, perhaps adds work to what they're doing, such as the example I mentioned earlier, or perhaps even takes away jobs that that they're scheduled to do. So it's all around the tasks that might be listed in the job description. So they're basically modified to suit the particular job holder. Now, this is the most obvious way of job crafting because it's so apparent, it's so obvious. It's all about the tasks that people do and how they might modify those tasks. Now, there might be good reason to do that. And, as I said, it comes from the employee. The employee sets the tone there. So task crafting is the very obvious example of job crafting. Now, the other two, you've got, let's go to relational crafting. Now, relational crafting is actually changing the interactions that the job holder has with the various stakeholders they work with. All right. So, for example, this particular employee might feel that he or she needs to build good working relationships up with somebody outside the organization in order to improve the work that they do. Or they've delegated a relationship to the manager or they believe they should delegate one of the relationships they work with to the manager. So it's all about the actual relationships that change. So obviously nobody works in a vacuum. We all work, with other people to complete our work and our job. So it's all about modifying those relationships in order to improve the quality of the work that's being done. So that's another way of job crafting. Now that's less obvious than task crafting because obviously it's about building relationships or modifying relationships. And that's not quite so obvious to people around them unless they're watching very closely. Now, the third one, I think, is a very interesting one. This is cognitive crafting. And cognitive crafting ultimately is about changing the way you view the perception you have of your job. So if you see your job as, just doing this or just doing that, then you're going to have a different energy to completing that job than if you saw it in a bigger picture. So, for example, if you've got a policy officer in a government agency, they might just see their work as just churning out policy papers on a constant basis, probably see no great value in doing that, and that's how they perceive their job, their work. But what if that policy officer saw that the policies that they wrote could be to improve the community around them, could actually create change, desirable change? Now, of course, if they saw their role in a different light, it would change their energy and it would change the way they went about doing that work. Now, often there is a combination between the three of these when you job craft. So whilst I'm sharing with you three different types of job crafting, there are examples where it would include or incorporate two of those dimensions, perhaps even three in some cases. So the most tangible one, of course, is task crafting, and the least tangible is the cognitive crafting, where somebody changes their view or perspective about the work that they do. Now, the manager can have, of course, some impact on cognitive crafting by giving people a different perspective of what their role is. But if someone just sees their role as unimportant, boring, mundane, if they see that role that way, well, they're going to perform their tasks with a low energy level, obviously. But if they see their job as an important player in a bigger picture, then of course they're going to put more energy into that. Now, here's another example of job crafting, and let me go through that. And I think this is a good example of job crafting where we've included cognitive crafting and perhaps even task crafting. So Harry, a bus driver, decides to give helpful sightseeing advice while traveling his regular route from the airport to the city. He's mindful that many of the passengers are from out of town. Harry perceives his job as more than driving a bus, which of course is cognitive crafting. By using his extensive knowledge, Harry decides to use his extroverted personality to good effect. He decides to add sightseeing to his primary task of driving a bus. Okay, so obviously he's adding value to the passengers that are on the bus, apart from taking them from A to B. He's obviously got a lot of local knowledge. He's quite willing to share that local knowledge. He knows that that local knowledge could be quite interesting and useful for some of the passengers. He's volunteered to do that. It's probably not written in his job description. And because of that, he decides to shape his job around that. That makes his life, his job, a lot more interesting. The passengers get a lot more out of it. Of course, many of them, when they get off the bus, when they get to their motel, are very, very happy and complimentary of Harry. So you can see that's a very simple example of what we might call cognitive crafting. He didn't see himself as a bus driver. He sees himself as much more than a bus driver. Okay. So I would also say to you that if you look at your own workplace, there are three groups of people that I think benefit mostly from job crafting. Now, let me just explain what those special groups might be. Now, the first group I want to talk about is older employees. So these are people at the end of their career. Now, why would they benefit from job crafting? Well, many of those people, of course, have had enormous experience. They've done a lot of things in their life, and they've got life experience, of course, as well as work experience. And many of them, if asked, are eager to share that information with younger employees in a sort of a mentoring role. So older workers are in a perfect position to job craft. And because they're very experienced at what they do, they can often understand, better ways of doing their job, more effective ways. They also know their strengths and they also know their needs. So that would be one group that would benefit greatly from job crafting. Now, another group would be employees with disabilities or health problems. Now, obviously, when someone has a disability or a health problem, and maybe that's not something that, maybe that's happened, since they started the job, they will obviously have certain needs, and some of those needs will restrict their capacity to complete the full, requirements of the job description. So in those circumstances, it would be very prudent for them to job craft and to consider ways of being able to do that more effectively, all the while just altering how they go about what they do. So that would be another group that would be very open to the concept of job crafting. Now, another group that's, and most of us have been through this, parents of younger children, particularly female employees. Now, because obviously when you've got young children, there's a huge amount of demand on the parents in terms of childcare and looking after that individual. And obviously that puts a lot of stresses and strains on the work-life balance situation. So in those circumstances, that group of people have special needs, and job crafting would definitely be applicable in those circumstances when parents have got young children, and obviously the work-life balance situation is quite challenged. So that would be another group that would be very open to the concept of job crafting. Okay, Here's an example of another form of job crafting, and I like this example because it brings in a number of different types of crafting. So Marilyn is an architect who specializes in designing offices for large companies. She goes out of her way to organize several informal meetings with her clients on a new office design project. During these meetings, Marilyn, instead of looking at the current job layout, observes the way people are working and how they interact with one another. After several visits, Marilyn changes the office designs based on her observations and interactions with the customer. So what she's doing here is she is relational crafting, because what she's doing, instead of just walking in and observing and going off and drawing up her plans, she's actually engaging with the workforce, observing and engaging and understanding in a far better way how people are operating. So she's in a better position to incorporate her observations and engagements in the plans and the designs that she puts forward. So there's an example of relational crafting. And of course, you could also argue that Marilyn is applying cognitive crafting too. So it's not just about producing plans for offices. She's also wanting to make people's working environments far more compatible. And so she's incorporating that in her design. And I guess maybe because she's modifying her tasks somewhat, there is a task dimension to that as well. So there's the third example. Now, if you wanted to implement a job crafting program, well, contact me, because I've implemented it in a number of different organizations. But ultimately, there are really 4 steps involved with this. The first step is you need to train people on what job crafting is, as I'm doing with you very briefly. And you need to explain to people the benefits of job crafting for themselves. So the benefits for the job holder themselves and the benefits for the manager as well. So people need to understand there's something in it for everybody. So that's important, because people need to understand what it's all about. And as I said before, people subconsciously job craft anyway, but of course we're talking about a more deliberate attempt to job craft in this type of program. The next step is a little onerous, but you get everybody to record their work activities for a week. So you give them a special form to fill out, usually electronic, can be done paper and pencil. But ultimately, what you need to do is get everybody to record how they're using their time for 1 week. Now, the argument is that during 1 week, it's likely that most of the situations that an employee will come across, they'll come across. So, it doesn't need to go for 2 weeks. 1 week is fine, but you get people to record what they're doing, what tasks they're doing, and, who they were doing those tasks with, and the outcome of those tasks for, short intervals. Now, once that's done, the next step is to create workshops, depending on the size of your organization, of course, but you create a workshop where you get people to reflect on their activity, their time log, to get them to sit down and think, okay, so based on this week and how it's traveled, what are some areas or what are some things that are open to job crafting to improve my own interest in the work and my own effectiveness? So you get people then to consider, task crafting, cognitive crafting, and relational crafting. And then what you want to do is encourage them then to sit down with their manager and to explain what their plans are in relation to job crafting. Because obviously the manager has a bigger overview, and they can either encourage that person or perhaps suggest to them that might cause an issue with another member of the team, because they've got a bit better perspective on that. So 4 steps essentially, and if you follow those 4 steps, you can create an excellent job crafting program. But as I said at the outset, this isn't about getting people to do whatever they want. Ultimately, there are some core competencies, some key result areas that you expect people who are employed in that job to do. So you're not going to suggest to them that they stop doing those things. But on the other hand, some things can be tweaked and modified to improve the person's interest in the work, to build on their strengths, and also, as I said earlier, to accommodate some of their needs in terms of employment. Okay, so just a quick plug for next week. Some of you would be aware, I've got a bit of a loyal following now of people coming in, but next week I'm going to actually talk about how you can how can job crafting be applied. So I'm going to give a little bit more information on that last slide around, the 4 steps of job crafting. So every Friday at around 10 o'clock, certainly sometime in the morning in Australian Eastern Standard Time, I have one of these 30-minute webinars, and you are most welcome to attend. You'll get a copy of the slides. I'll be sending them to you shortly. You'll get a copy of the recording as well. And all you've got to do, of course, is just click on that link on the slide, or it'll be in the email as well that I send you. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And just click on that link just as you did today, and you're in. So that's that. The other thing I'd like to say is if you'd like a copy of my book, my new book, Breaking the Proactive Paradox, Maximising Performance Through Empowerment, of which job crafting is part of that, then if you send me an email by the close of business today, I will send you a copy with a discount for $30 instead of the normal $40. Now, the book will be available very soon. It'll be out. So you'll be one of the very first people to receive a copy. I will sign it personally for you. And of course, you'll get it for a discount. All you've got to do is send me an email just saying you'd like a copy of the book, and I can arrange that for you very easily with an invoice and all the rest of it. So folks, that's it from me. I'll just stop sharing for a moment. Thank you, everyone. If you do have any questions, send me an email. I'm more than happy to look at that. And thank you and goodbye. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.